Good afternoon all. Now I continue my video lecture series based upon database management system. Now my topic is on locking protocol. In this type of protocol, any transaction cannot read or write data until it acquires a appropriate lock on it. There are two type of lock: shared lock and exclusive lock. Shared lock, it is also known as read-only lock. In a shared lock, the data items can only read by the transaction. It can be shared between the transaction because when the transaction hold a lock, that it cannot update the data on the data items. Exclusive lock, in an exclusive lock, the data items can be both read as well as written by the transaction. This lock is exclusive, and in this lock multiple transactions do not modify the same data simultaneously. There are four types of locking protocols available. Simplistic locking protocol. In this simplest way of locking, then the data while transaction, simplistic locking based protocols allows all the transaction to get the lock on the data before insert or delete or update on it. It will unlock the data items after completing the transactions. Pre-climbing lock protocols. Pre-climbing lock protocols evaluates the transactions to list all the data items on which the need locks. Before initiating an execution on the transaction, it requests DBMS for all the lock on those data items. If all the lock are granted, then this protocol allows the transaction to begin. When the transaction is completed, then it releases all the locks. If all the locks are not granted, then this protocol allows the transaction to roll back and wait until all the locks are granted. When the transaction begins, lock is attained. When the transaction ends, the lock is released for next transactions. Two-phase locking protocol, 2PL. Two-phase locking protocol divides the execution phase of transactions in three parts. The first part, when the execution of transaction starts, it seeks permission for a lock it requires. In the second part, the transactions acquires all the locks. The third part is started as soon as the transaction releases its first lock. In the third phase, the transaction cannot demand any new locks. It will only release the acquired locks. There are two phases of 2PL: growing phase and shrinking phase. In the growing phase, a new lock on the data items may be acquired by the transactions, but none of can be released. Shrinking phases. In the shrinking phases, existing lock held by the transaction may be released, but no new lock can be acquired. In the above example, if lock conversion is allowed, then the following phase. Upgrading of lock is allows for grouping phases. Downgrading of lock must be done in shrinking phases. Strict two-phase locking. Strict 2PL. The first phase of strict 2PL is similar to 2PL. In the second phase, after acquiring all the locks, the transaction continues to execute normally. The only difference between 2PL and strict 2PL is that strict 2PL does not release the lock after using it. Strict 2PL wait until the whole transaction commit, then it release all the locks at the time. Strict 2PL protocol does not have shrinking phase of lock release. We are having an example for shrinking phase. If the transaction T1 locks transaction T1, growing phase and shrinking phase and locking point. Growing phase from step 1 to step 3, from shrinking phase is step 5 to 7, lock point at 3. In the strict 2PL, strict two-phase locking protocol is when the transaction begins, the lock is attained. When the transaction ends, all the commit transaction will be released, and then after the release, the end of the transaction will be taken place. And it does not having cascading abort of 2PL does not.